Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 91, June the 3rd, 2017, Saturday. Well, I've had a busy day today. We've had some beautiful weather. Hopefully you all are getting a good start to your weekend. And I got up this morning and had to do a little musical studio session, which we got done in about 2 hours. Then I had to go to the store, do a little laundry, and getting ready to go out and cut the grass here shortly. It was like 88 degrees out there today, so I was waiting for it to cool off a little bit. And so after I finish this video, I'm going to go out and cut my grass, and tomorrow I will be able to relax. So anyway, that's what's going on as far as myself, but hopefully you guys are having a good weekend. A couple things on TowerGate, kind of slow today, but a couple things I'm going to touch on. First of all, stumbled across a really good article by Rowan Scarborough, who's a journalist I've been reading for years. He's a pretty down-the-road, middle-of-the-road type reporter. I think he's kind of a Republican, but you know, he's pretty much down the middle-of-the-road journalist. And he's writing in this particular piece for the Washington Times. And he's really honing in a lot more on the John Brennan testimony from last week, and talking about why Brennan may be called back to testify. Now, we know from what we talked about yesterday and what's already been learned that specifically they want to talk to Brennan about request for unmasking that may have been made by members of the Obama administration, specifically Power and also Susan Rice. But they're also interested in Brennan himself, and it has to do with something that came out in the hearings when when they were trying to get him to talk about the dossier. As we all know, John Brennan wanted to distance himself from the dossier that was put together by Christopher Steele, and we know that Clapper and Rogers also are trying to distance themselves from the dossier, and with good reason. It turned out to be largely a hoax. James Comey, unfortunately for him, he cannot distance himself from the dossier because he's already locked in, has gone on the record under oath admitting that the dossier was a major driver for him, although he says there were other things. That's primarily what it was, the dossier, and that's pretty well known, and it will continue to be probably known even to a more fuller extent once they get Comey back in there and ask him some more questions and dig a little deeper. But there was something that Brennan said that caught the ear of Rowan Scarborough. And he basically, in those hearings, he said that he first contacted, Brennan is saying that he first contacted Comey on May the 23rd of 2016, which would have been prior to the dossier. So this was John Brennan's way of saying, hey, you know, the dossier wasn't what was driving me. I actually contacted the FBI back on May 23rd, 2016 because of his word, tidbits of information showing interaction or contact between Trump team members and Russians. He didn't specifically say which Trump team members, but we know he's talking about both Manafort and Carter Page, although Carter Page was not really part of the Trump team. Also, he did not mention the name of any Russians. It was just a very general statement. Probably said more is a way for Brennan to explain away why the dossier wasn't a big deal to him, because he actually is saying, no, I actually came to Comey on the 23rd of May 2016 prior to the dossier. So I think Brennan's point in making that statement was to distance himself from the dossier. But as Rowan Scarborough points out, that raises another question, because his reasoning was very vague when he says, well, some communication or contact between Russians. He doesn't say what type of Russians, government officials or private citizens or bankers or whoever. He doesn't really say. And he also doesn't really get specific on the Trump officials. But what this does is it means that you have to dig in a little deeper into Brennan. And so obviously they want to know. Now I'm talking about the House Intelligence Committee, which has largely been kind of in the background since Nunes had to step down. And then the House Oversight Committee, which is generally viewed to be a more prestigious or higher level committee than the House Intelligence Committee, has kind of been taking the lead on the House side. Now, of course, we have the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is primarily running a Russia all the time sort of hearings. They're not dealing too much, other than Senator Grassley ask a few questions about surveillance, but mostly in the Senate they're talking about the Russia hacking, Russia meddling, whatever, Russia collusion. But in the House Oversight Committee, it's been kind of a mishmash of a lot of things. But on the House Intelligence Committee, it seems that the Republicans there, Nunes and others, are most interested in the surveillance issue and the unmasking and the leaking. So that may be where we'll see Brennan probably probed a little harder than he was probed by the Oversight Committee in the House or by the Senate Intelligence Committee, because they want to get real specific with him about who he was interacting with in regards to these requests for unmasking. And it appears that Trey Gowdy knows that Samantha Power requested unmasking. I think that's about 98% to be believed, based on the series of questions and the fact that she's now made it into the headlines as a person of interest. And it's going to be Brennan and Clapper and Rogers coming back to testify. This is specifically what the House Intelligence Committee is going to be targeting on the Republican side. They're going to be wanting to know from Brennan and these other two characters exactly what their interaction was with Powers and Susan Rice. So this is very interesting, and this is something we'll have to look for in those hearings. I don't know when Brennan is scheduled. I know Comey is supposed to be there Wednesday or Thursday of this upcoming week, and I believe that's on the Senate side. But I think the House Intelligence Committee is a place to watch for the surveillance stuff. So that's a very interesting thing that I think that we'll have to look for, is how Brennan handles those questions when he's asked, what was your relationship with Susan Rice, the White House, Samantha Power? Did they request unmasking? When did they request unmasking? And all these sorts of questions, because remember, Samantha Power, as ambassador to the UN, should have had no business whatsoever in any type of surveillance or investigations or anything like that. And even Susan Rice, as a national security advisor, she is a consumer of intelligence. And once she gets that intelligence, she is supposed to give the president advice. But she herself is also not supposed to be running investigations, requesting unmasking or surveillance or anything else. But we know this was being done out of the Obama White House from the IG report that came out about a week and a half ago. So this is something to watch. Next up, we have another interesting character who really slipped off my radar screen, who I'd forgotten about, although I was having a hate attack on this guy during the election, particularly in the general election, because he kept going on CNN and saying really nasty things about Donald Trump. And of course, I'm talking about Michael Hayden. Michael Hayden was the CIA director when Obama came into office, and he served for the first, I guess, 5 or 6 years of the first term of Obama, and maybe 1 year into the second term. And then, of course, we got John Brennan replaced Michael Hayden. But it appears now that Michael Hayden has now come up as a possible person of interest so far as the leaking is concerned, because he was a regular contributor to CNN. He is a liberal. He is a Donald Trump hater. He was the former head of the CIA during the first 4 or 5 years of Obama. And for whatever reason, they believe that some of the leaks that went to the Washington Post and New York Times may have come from Michael Hayden. So they're wanting to talk to Michael Hayden. Now, it appears that Michael Hayden has recently decided to buy a $2 million home in Ireland. For some reason, Mr. Hayden has decided that he would like to move to Ireland rather quickly. He's basically got his house up for sale here, but he's not waiting. It appears that he's not waiting for his house to sell. He's already purchased a home in Ireland. He's getting ready to go. He's getting ready to leave the country. It may be that Michael Hayden has gotten wind that his name is now on the list, and therefore it looks like he may want to flee to England, or Ireland rather, and he can actually become an Irish citizen, because according to Irish law, if your grandparents were born there, either one, and in his case it was both, born in Ireland, you can actually get Irish citizenship. It'll be interesting to see if Mr. Hayden relinquishes his U.S. citizenship, because I do believe in the case of Ireland, I don't believe you can have dual citizenship of Ireland and the United States. Maybe you can. I'm not sure about. There are some countries we can have dual citizenship with. One of them for sure is Israel, but I'm not sure about Ireland. But it's still very interesting that Michael Hayden, who is a real worm, he did some really nasty interviews with CNN, is a regular contributor there during the election campaign, and he never had a good thing ever to say about Donald Trump. He is a Trump hater, and it's very likely that Mr. Hayden, still with friends in the CIA and in the intelligence community, being the former director, may have been a person who, and he's also friends with Brennan, by the way, may have been a person who maybe got information from Brennan or others in the CIA, and maybe he is the source of the leaks to the Washington Post and the New York Times. So it appears his name has come up on the radar screen, Michael Hayden. There's also a site that I check out every now and then. Not a huge fan of it, but it's on my list of sites I'll look at, and they don't give the source of this particular story that they've done, but I'll tell you what it is, and but it's not something I have fact checked very hard, and I don't know if there's any other sources or what the original source is. It's a website called Total Research, or Total Rehash, I'm sorry, totalrehash.com, and basically they are reporting that the entire last presidential staff under Obama is being subpoenaed at some point or another in the next 6 months. They will get to everyone, and I don't know if that includes Obama himself, but certainly that would be Rice, Jarrett, obviously Power, Rhodes, Lynch, and there's probably other people on that list, but it appears that he's stating that the entire last presidential staff under Obama is being subpoenaed, and it's also reporting that if they do not show up, that they will issue arrest warrants for them. Now, I've never seen that done before. Typically what happens is if you get a subpoena to appear before Congress and you don't, they generally refer it to the Department of Justice, and then the Department of Justice will say, well, is there something really here? And if there is, then we will go ahead and we will set court hearings and set an arraignment and go ahead and set out an arrest warrant. It'll be done through the Department of Justice. I don't think that the Congress can initiate arrest warrants. I think that can only be done through the Department of Justice. But not really sure how true this story is, but it's very interesting because it would make sense because we are learning more and more about the fact that more and more Obama administration officials may have been involved as a result of the recent IG report, which states that there was actual intelligence operations and surveillance being run right out of the White House. We're not talking about the CIA. We're not talking about the FBI. We're not even talking about the NSA or anyone else. We are literally talking about people in the Obama administration running intelligence operations out of the White House. So yes, you would need to speak to almost all those top Obama administration officials. And again, I mean, the people have the two biggest problem that I can see. Obviously, we don't know. Brennan is going to have to be probed a little bit deeper because he's now, as Rowan Scarborough stated in his Washington Times article, the very fact that, and in order to distance himself from the dossier, he's also now Brennan has also sort of put himself in a little bit of a bind because he's now stated that he was the one that got the FBI looking into the Trump situation and the Trump associates, because of the date, May the 23rd, 2016, was prior to the dossier and prior to a lot of the other things. That was about the same time that the early reports of the DNC being either A, hacked, or B, leaks coming out. Of course, most of us believe that those were leaks coming from Seth Rich, but the mainstream or corporate line is that it was hacks coming from the Russians. But regardless of what it was right around May when those first incidents regarding information getting out of the DNC occurred. That was back in the late spring, prior to the dossier, and prior to the Seth Rich murder, and prior to the WikiLeaks release. So this is very interesting for Mr. Brennan. It appears that he's put himself in an interesting position, and so now he is going to have to explain a little farther as to why he gave this information to the FBI. Now, he says because it involved the surveillance or investigation of American citizens, which the CIA generally does not do. They generally turn that information over to the FBI. But the question is, how did John Brennan and the CIA get on that story? How did they, they picked up contacts or tidbits or what have you? Well, they're going to want to know what led to that. Was Brennan tipped off by someone in the White House, by the Obama administration? Was it Susan Rice? Was it Samantha Power? Was it Valerie Jarrett? Who was it? Ben Rhodes? Who was it in the White House that got Brennan to look into this stuff? And if it wasn't any of them, then what was it? And who was it? These are questions, and probably why they want to have Brennan back, because he kind of set himself up here. He would have been better off just to say, I wasn't influenced by the dossier and stop there. But he didn't. He volunteered as kind of to buttress his point that, it wasn't the dossier. That didn't come out till later. I actually talked to Comey on the 23rd of May 2016 about Trump's team having connections or conversations or interactions or contacts with Russians. So he is going to have to now delve a little bit deeper into exactly the who's and what's and why's of this particular action that he took. That would be Mr. Brennan. And as far as Comey, he's already locked in because he's admitted to what he did. And of course, Susan Rice is locked in because she admitted, first she denied on PBS that she knew anything about surveillance or unmasking. Then once it became public that she did, then she went on Andrea Mitchell's MSNBC show for a softball question and answer session where she tried to clear herself by stating, yes, we did do unmasking, but it wasn't political. Well, here's the problem that Susan Rice has, and it's why she wants immunity. It's because that comment in itself is bullshit. Let me explain to you why. The National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, is in the business of being a consumer of intelligence information. She does not work at the CIA. She does not work at the NSA. She does not work at the DIA. She does not work at the FBI intelligence or counterintelligence. In other words, she does not work in intelligence or investigation. She is a national security or foreign policy type advisor, a consumer of intel. So if she, in fact, was requesting unmasking or surveillance, and particularly because it was on members of Trump's team, it could only have been political. It couldn't have been for reasons of the fact that she was doing an investigation for the government and national security or intelligence, because that's not the role of the National Security Advisor. The National Security Advisor doesn't do investigations, doesn't do surveillance, doesn't do unmasking, doesn't do any of these things. She's a consumer, not an investigator. But yet, we now know that she made herself an investigator, even though that's not the former role of the National Security Advisor. And she cannot explain that. because these are clear facts, very well understood by the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, who are going to be asking her these questions. That's why she needs immunity, because this was all purely political, had nothing to do. And what's, there's no way to explain herself. When she's asked why she was doing it, what's she going to say? Oh, well, I was receiving intelligence about Trump's team and the Russians and blah, blah, blah. Really? Why? How? How is that all going on? You were a national security advisor. Were you conducting an investigation? That's a question she doesn't want to answer. Oh, was the intelligence community, did Brennan or did Comey or did Rogers or did Clapper, did they call you on the phone and say, hey, we're doing these investigations. We just thought we'd call and see what you know. I don't think so. These types of investigations held within the intelligence agencies do not get disseminated to the National Security Advisor for recommendations or questions or anything else, and they certainly don't contact the National Security Advisor to discuss whether or not they should be unmasking or surveilling people. They just do it. They are the ones conducting the investigation, not the National Security Advisor. She would be the one getting briefed on what they discover after they, the agencies that do this kind of work, conduct their investigation. And they generally do not contact people within the presidential administration and have these kind of interactions. I mean, that would be extraordinary. And if that were the case, then then Clapper, Brennan, and Rogers, or whoever, would have to explain themselves. They would then have to explain why, in their position as heads of these intel communities, why they would need to contact the National Security Advisor to find out what she knows about Trump's team communicating with Russians. She would not have information any more than they would. They're the ones conducting their surveillance. They're the ones with all the investigative technique. They're the ones with all the professionals that do that kind of work. The National Security Advisor doesn't do that. So Susan Rice is in a real big pickle, because I can assure you that Brennan and Rogers and Comey and all the rest are not going to give her cover. She's on her own, and she knows it. And Samantha Power is in an even worse situation. If she is asked by Trey Gowdy, and I believe she will be, as well as other people on the House Intelligence Committee, why in the world she was requesting unmasking or surveillance, that's going to be a very tricky one. So anyway, these are the things that are kind of breaking or making the headlines regarding TowerGate. Again, as this continues to play itself out, it may take 6 months, it may take a year. I'm telling you, eventually some of these things are going to shake themselves out. There is a point here where these people are going to have to testify, and they are going to have to give some answers to some questions. If they continue to stonewall and delay and continue to not give real answers, I can assure you that both the House Oversight and Intelligence Committees will refer these issues to the Department of Justice, and I can assure you that they will proceed further to get to the bottom of it. So the only thing they can do is buy time. That's the only thing they can do, because the story's not going away. Obviously, we saw this week with Sean Spicer in the press conference stating flat out, this story is not going away. We believe that there was surveillance done. We believe it needs to be looked into, and the president is adamant that this get taken care of, that this be investigated. We also had Donald Trump himself tweeting twice last week in regards to the surveillance, and we still have Rand Paul pursuing his legal letter that he sent, wanting to know exactly if he was unmasked and or wiretapped or surveilled or anything like that. So this isn't going away. Trump isn't going to let it go away. And when the Russia narrative all falls away, the only thing that will be left standing will be the issue of surveillance, unmasking, and leaking. That's eventually where this is all going to end up. maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. But eventually, these questions are going to have to be answered, because we're talking about the President of the United States wants these questions answered. And if the President wants those questions answered, and he wants to keep pushing for this, it's not going to go away. That's one thing about being President of the United States. You can kind of make these things happen. And the only way that this thing is not going to be followed through and carried out is if Trump loses interest. And I don't believe he will, because I think he knows there's some serious smoking guns here. So he's going to keep pushing for it. And by the way, if Donald Trump is blocked from doing anything else in his first 4 years, if he gets nothing else done, if he doesn't get his budget through, if he can't repeal Obamacare, although it's going to collapse on its own probably within the next 12 to 18 months, and something will have to be done. But if he gets none of the other things, building his wall or any of these other things done, he will already have been a fantastically better president than Hillary or anyone I can think of would have been, because he's done two wonderful things. He killed the TTP, and now he's killed the Paris Climate Agreement, or at least he has made it clear that we're not going to participate in it. This was a global shakedown, which would have cost the U.S. economy trillions of dollars, tens of millions of jobs, and economic opportunity and economic growth. This was a job killer. It was a business killer. It had a lot to do with deindustrialization. It had a lot to do with control out of the EU. It had a lot to do with setting the stage for an international carbon tax. It had a lot to do with a lot of things, but it had very, very little to do with doing anything good for the environment. It was a gigantic international shakedown. This is exactly what it was, and this is all it was. So, thank God that Donald Trump has taken us out of that horrible agreement. And this is going to have really, really positive effects for the economy and job creation, because a lot of these larger corporations, particularly who have high energy cost, have been looking at this treaty. That's one reason they've been sitting on that money that they've got parked overseas. It's a reason why they have not been expanding and hiring. It's because they knew that this Paris Climate Agreement was going to do serious harm to them. And so it's one of the reasons they've been sitting on their hands and not letting go of the trillions of dollars of investment dollars that they have ready and waiting to go. They were waiting for this to be dealt with so they would know how to proceed forward. And they were probably going to put their companies in India and China after this agreement. But now that we're not part of this agreement, they can now build those companies here. They can create those jobs here, create that tax revenue base here, and benefit the United States. They can benefit Americans, American workers. This was a absolutely fantastic position for Donald Trump to take. It's a ballsy position to take. He is going to take a lot of heat, but who cares? It was the right decision for American workers, the American economy, for jobs, and for long-term economic growth, sustained growth, because this deal was a job killer, a business killer, and it was a gigantic shakedown on an international level. So thank God Trump has done that. So these two things alone, TTP and the getting out of the Paris Climate Agreement, just those two things alone will almost guarantee that by the time 2020 comes up, that this economy will be booming. We will probably have at least 3 to 3.5% growth, could even hit 4. If it goes over 4, you might have to raise interest rates. We could also end up with a situation where we don't have enough workers to fill all the jobs. We could end up with like a 2% unemployment rate or 1.5% unemployment rate. Then we would have to start exporting workers into the country. Wouldn't that be amazing? So Donald Trump's done a lot of really good things. You never hear about it being reported in the press, but these two things are monumentally wonderful for jobs and job creation, and they will have a big impact on Trump getting elected, because remember, most people vote when they go to vote to re-elect a president. They almost always, 98% of their decision is made based on their economy. If gas prices are fairly low, if their energy prices are fairly low, if they have a job and feel like their job's going to be around for a while, if they see their 401k growing, if these basic economic signs that the average voter experiences in their everyday life are looking favorable to them. In the weeks leading up to the election, the president gets reelected. You know, he can be making foreign policy mistakes. He can be having a lot of stuff going on around him, like what Trump has, like what Clinton had, and all these other things. You'll still get reelected. If people think the economy's good, they vote the economy. They vote their bank account. And that's exactly what they do. And Trump knows this, I believe. And these two things he's done are going to almost ensure that this economy by 2020 is going to be booming, as well as job creation as well, and the stock market doing what it's doing. He also will be appointing a new Fed chairman in 2 years. So I believe 2018 is when Janet Yellen's term will be up, and I'm certain he will not replace Janet Yellen, that he'll reappoint her. I'm certain he will replace her, and I think he'll replace her with someone who's probably a little more austere on the monetary side, and so I think that that's very good news. And there's also going to be, of the 9 Federal Reserve board members, I believe that he'll be reappointing 6 of the 9 will be new board members within his first 4 years as well. So we're going to see a big change in monetary policy to go along with his economic policy, his trade policy, and his tax policy. And all this adds up to a really booming economy with a lot of job creation, low taxes, and low energy prices, low energy costs. And this is a very good way to get reelected. So anyway, that's what's going on today for TowerGate, day 91. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy reading your comments. We'll be back tomorrow and see what other shoe drops. Drip, drip, drip. Y'all take care. Bye.